Okay, so you've finally taken the plunge and you're starting therapy.
Yeah.
But then it hits you, like,
Mhm.
wait a minute, how does this money thing actually work?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, like fees, and what about insurance?
Mm.
And what if you have to, like reschedule? It can
Mhm.
feel a little bit like walking into a bit of a maze.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
if you've ever felt that way, this deep dive is for you.
Absolutely.
Today we are diving into something that's probably on a lot of people's minds,
Uh,
but not always openly discussed.
for sure.
The ethical guidelines that psychologists adhere to regarding professional fees and other financial arrangements.
Yeah.
We're looking at excerpts from a resource titled Fees and Financial Arrangements.
Right.
And our goal is to make this all crystal clear for you as the listener.
Absolutely.
We want to give you the information you need to feel empowered and informed
Yeah, for sure.
as you navigate the financial side of your therapeutic journey.
Absolutely.
So it all starts with a really fundamental principle.
Yeah.
Open and early communication about finances.
Yeah.
Right from the start.
It seems like the ethical standard here is crystal clear.
Mm-hmm.
You and your psychologist should have a straightforward conversation about fees and billing right at the beginning.
Exactly.
Ideally as part of that initial informed consent process.
Yeah. Standard 6.04a actually emphasizes that.
Really?
Yeah. It says that this agreement on payment and how billing will work should happen as early as is feasible.
Mhm.
And that this isn't just a suggestion.
Right.
It's a core ethical responsibility.
Okay, so what exactly should be covered in that initial chat?
Well,
Because when you're starting therapy,
yeah,
you're often, focused on a lot of other things.
absolutely.
It can be a lot to take in.
It can.
So what are the key things that the guidelines specify?
The guidelines specify several key areas.
Okay.
First of all, the psychologist's fee per session,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're using insurance, your copay.
Right.
Crucially, it also involves policies on things like missed or canceled appointments.
Which can be, a real source of stress if you're not prepared.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then also how your insurance will be handled.
Okay.
Any limitations on your treatment because of your insurance coverage.
Hmm.
So for instance, if your plan only authorizes a certain number of sessions,
Right.
and also the psychologist procedures for dealing with unpaid bills.
Okay, so it's really about laying everything out on the table right from the start.
Exactly.
No financial surprises down the road.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about situations where maybe the standard fee might be a real obstacle
Okay.
for someone seeking therapy.
Yeah.
I've heard about something called a sliding fee scale.
That's a great point.
Can you explain what that is?
So a sliding fee scale is where the fee is adjusted based on an individual's ability to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while sliding fee scales aren't specifically mandated in the ethics code,
Okay.
they are generally considered an ethically sound practice.
So not required, but recognized and often utilized.
Exactly. The crucial thing is that any sliding scale arrangement needs to be fair,
Yeah.
and above all, in the client's best interest.
Okay.
It shouldn't be based on, arbitrary factors or discriminatory in any way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Sounds like a way to make therapy more accessible for people
Absolutely.
who might otherwise really struggle with the cost.
Definitely.
Now let's move into a little bit of a more sensitive area.
Yeah.
What happens if, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
fees end up going unpaid?
Yeah. This is where the ethical guidelines actually offer a clear pathway for psychologists to follow.
Okay.
Standard 6.04e outlines the steps.
Mm.
And the first and arguably most important step is open communication.
Okay, so no sudden demands for payment,
Well-
no immediate involvement of collection agencies.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
The guidelines really emphasize that a psychologist should first discuss the overdue fees directly with the client.
Mm-hmm.
The aim is to find a mutually acceptable solution, perhaps a payment plan or a better understanding of any temporary financial difficulties the client might be facing.
So going back to that initial feeling of awkwardness about finances,
Yeah.
it sounds like the ethical guidelines really prioritize that open communication
Mm-hmm.
to avoid those situations escalating and becoming super stressful.
For sure.
Okay.
It's only if a resolution can't be reached through that direct conversation
Right.
that a psychologist can then consider involving a collection agency
Mm-hmm.
or pursuing legal action.
Okay.
But, and this is important, they have to inform you
Okay.
of their intention to take those steps
Right.
and give you a chance to address the outstanding balance.
So you get a warning.
Exactly.
It's not going to come as a complete shock.
No.
Right.
And even if a collection agency does become involved,
Mm.
the psychologist is ethically required to only share essential information.
Okay.
So your name, address, and the amount of money owed.
Okay, so your personal details aren't just being shared broadly.
No.
That's good.
Yeah, your privacy and confidentiality remain paramount concerns.
Good.
However, there is one specific exception to confidentiality that's relevant here.
Okay, what's that?
It relates to something called breach of duty.
Hmm.
So in situations where a disagreement about payment escalates into legal proceedings,
Right.
the ethical code acknowledges that psychologists may need to disclose necessary information
Okay.
that's directly related to that legal issue.
Right, so it's about being able to present the necessary facts
Exactly.
in a legal context,
Yes.
if it comes to that.
Exactly.
Now, what if someone is in therapy
Yeah.
and they experience a temporary financial setback?
Yeah, the guidelines recognize that life can throw unexpected curveballs our way.
For sure.
So if you face a temporary financial crisis, your psychologist has options.
Okay.
They might temporarily lower or waive their fee.
Mm.
They could reduce the frequency of your sessions,
Right.
or even pause therapy for a period that you both agree on.
So there's flexibility. It's not a rigid pay in full or treatment stops situation.
That's right.
Okay, good.
Now, while psychologists aren't obligated to continue providing treatment indefinitely without any payment,
Right.
abruptly terminating therapy or referring you to a lower-cost provider after a therapeutic relationship has been established,
Okay.
and you're actively engaged in treatment is generally considered unacceptable.
So that's to protect the continuity of care
Exactly.
and avoid disrupting progress.
Yes, you don't want to feel abandoned
Right.
in the middle of working through something important.
Exactly.
There is a critical exception to this principle, though.
Okay.
In an emergency situation,
Yeah.
a psychologist has an ethical obligation to continue providing treatment,
Okay.
regardless of your ability to pay,
Oh.
until that immediate crisis is resolved.
So in a genuine crisis,
Yeah,
the focus is on getting you through it.
exactly. Your well-being in that moment takes absolute priority.
Now let's talk about receiving therapy services for free, which is often called pro bono work.
Pro bono services are professional services offered without any charge,
Mm-hmm.
and they're addressed in the Ethics Code,
Okay.
General Principle B,
Yeah.
which focuses on fidelity and responsibility.
Okay.
Encourages psychologists to dedicate a portion of their professional time
Mm-hmm.
to work for little or no compensation.
So it's seen as a positive contribution
Yes, exactly.
to the community.
Exactly.
Now, is this a requirement?
So because it's included in the aspirational general principles,
Okay.
rather than the mandatory ethical standards,
Mhm.
it's recommended but not a strict requirement.
Got it.
So some psychologists may offer pro bono slots,
Yeah.
but it's not something you can necessarily expect
Right.
as a standard offering.
That's good to know.
It helps to manage expectations.
Yeah, and the guidelines also touch on the idea
Yes,
that offering free sessions shouldn't be used as a way to attract new clients.
that's correct.
So it's about maintaining that ethical boundary.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's get into a slightly more nuanced area. The topic of bartering and accepting gifts.
Bartering, which involves accepting goods, services, or other non-monetary compensation
Right.
in exchange for therapy sessions, is addressed in Standard 6.05.
Okay.
And the Ethics Code states that bartering is acceptable,
Okay.
but only if it's not clinically contraindicated
Mm-hmm.
and the arrangement isn't exploitative.
So it's not an outright no,
Right.
but there are some significant conditions. Like
Yeah.
what are some examples?
So, for example, bartering should be avoided if it's likely to compromise the psychologist's objectivity
Yeah.
or negatively impact the therapeutic relationship in any way,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's difficult to objectively determine the fair monetary value
Yeah.
of the goods or services being exchanged.
Right. Imagine trying to equate a certain number of hours of web design
Exactly.
with a certain number of therapy sessions.
Right. It can get very complicated.
Yeah, and potentially problematic.
Yes.
And our source material mentions some specific factors that a therapist should consider even if they're thinking about bartering.
Yeah. Cantor et al. 1994 suggests several considerations.
Okay, like what?
They include the psychologist's theoretical orientation,
Mm-hmm.
the client's specific diagnosis, and any potential dependency needs,
Okay.
the anticipated duration of treatment, and the specific details of the proposed barter arrangement.
Mm.
They highlight that certain types of exchanges,
Okay.
such as offering housekeeping or childcare services,
Yeah.
could be particularly problematic.
Right.
Because if those services aren't satisfactory,
Yeah.
it can really blur the lines
Yeah.
and potentially have negative consequences.
It makes sense
Yeah.
if your therapist is relying on you for essential services.
Right.
It could really change that professional relationship.
Exactly. And the guidelines also emphasize the importance of considering the potential for exploitation of both the client and the psychologist.
Okay, so both sides.
Yeah.
So while the main concern is protecting the client, the psychologist could also feel exploited
Right.
if the agreed upon goods or services aren't what they expected.
Exactly. And that could indirectly affect the quality of the therapy.
Right, so it sounds like bartering is
Yeah.
a bit of a minefield
It can be.
that's generally best to avoid.
Yeah, you really want to proceed with extreme caution.
Now, what about clients giving gifts to their therapists?
That's interesting because the ethics code doesn't actually have a specific standard
Okay.
that directly addresses accepting gifts from clients. So in these situations, psychologists are expected to rely on those broader ethical principles
Okay.
and their own clinical judgment.
So it's more case by case.
It is.
What kinds of things might a therapist consider
Yeah.
when deciding whether or not to accept a gift?
Well, several factors come into play.
Okay.
The fundamental principle of do no harm is always paramount.
Of course.
They'll likely consider the monetary value of the gift,
Okay.
whether it's something impersonal or more personal, whether it's a one-time gesture or part of a pattern,
Right.
any relevant cultural considerations.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, how accepting or declining the gift might impact the therapeutic relationship.
It's complicated.
It is.
Sounds like it could be a topic
Yeah,
for discussion within a therapy session.
absolutely.
Okay, final financial aspect we want to talk about today is referral fees.
Okay.
So Standard 6.7 addresses this.
Yes.
And it clarifies that when psychologists pay or receive payment from another professional who isn't their employee,
Right.
any payment has to be based on actual services provided.
Yes.
So that could be clinical work consultation, administrative tasks,
Yeah.
other legitimate professional activities.
Exactly.
It can't just be for making the referral.
That's right.
No finder's fee, just for sending a client to another therapist.
Exactly.
The APA has also clarified that paying a percentage of a fee to a colleague is acceptable,
Okay.
as long as that percentage reflects the fair market value of the services they actually provided.
Makes sense.
It's about compensating for actual work,
Right.
not just rewarding the referral.
Exactly.
Now, there's a really important legal point here.
Okay.
In some jurisdictions, like under California's Business and Professions Code, paying or receiving any kind of compensation just for referring clients is actually prohibited. It's considered unprofessional conduct
Wow.
and could even lead to disciplinary action.
So it's not just ethically frowned upon, it's against the law.
It is in some places.
Wow, that's important to know.
Yeah, it underscores how important it is for both psychologists and clients to be aware of not only the national ethical guidelines,
Right.
but also any specific local laws or regulations.
Absolutely. Awareness is key.
Well, this has been incredibly helpful
Yeah.
in clarifying all these financial aspects of therapy.
For sure.
So to wrap things up for our listener,
Yeah.
what would you say are the most important things to remember?
I'd say the overarching message here is that transparent and open communication about fees and billing from the start is essential.
Yeah.
You should always feel empowered to ask questions
Absolutely.
and fully understand the financial arrangements.
And remember those options like sliding scales
Yes.
and temporary adjustments for financial difficulties
Exactly.
might be available.
Right.
And also be aware of those ethical boundaries around things like bartering and referral fees,
Yeah.
which are there to protect you
Yes.
and ensure a fair and professional relationship.
Absolutely.
It really highlights that these ethical guidelines are in place to help create that safe, respectful, equitable space
For sure.
for you to focus on your mental well-being
Exactly.
without the added stress of financial issues.
Or the potential for exploitation.
It all comes back to building that trust
Absolutely.
and maintaining those professional boundaries.
Yeah.
So as we finish up here, what questions might you, our listener now, feel more confident asking your therapist about their financial practices?
That's a great question.
It's all about empowering yourself with knowledge
Exactly.
and feeling comfortable having those conversations.
I've